My name is Thomas Michael Richardson. I'm 46 years old, and on June 22nd, 2025, I was dead for 9 minutes while I was praying in the morning, and I got a warning from Jesus that's going to totally blow your mind. For 22 years, I've been a Christian who really believed. I was a deacon at Cornerstone Baptist Church, and I was a guy who thought he knew what it meant to follow Jesus. But that morning, I found out that everything I thought I knew about the end times was going to happen really soon, right in front of us. I grew up in a Christian family in the countryside of Kentucky, where my dad worked on our family farm, and my mom taught Sunday school at our little country church. Being Christian wasn't just something we did on Sundays. It was part of everything we did every day. We prayed before we ate anything, read the Bible every night after dinner, and talked about Jesus like he was a real person who cared about everything in our lives. I became a Christian when I was 12 years old at a summer church event. The feeling was so powerful that night. I knew I had done bad things and needed someone to save me, and I knew Jesus had died to take away my sins. When I walked down to the front and prayed with Pastor Miller, I felt all the heaviness of my sins lift off me like heavy chains falling off. I married my girlfriend from college, Rebecca, when I was 24. She was a godly woman who loved reading the Bible and praying just like me. We built our house following the Bible, raised our 3 kids, Sarah, Joshua, and Hannah, to be Christians, and served faithfully in whatever church God put us. For the last 15 years, we've gone to Cornerstone Baptist Church, where I've been a deacon and Rebecca runs the women's ministry. I teach the men's Bible study every Wednesday night, and our family has never skipped church unless someone was really sick. If you looked at us from the outside, we were perfect Christians living good lives. But if I'm telling the truth, something had been missing from my spiritual life for the last few years. My prayers had become boring, like I was just saying the same things over and over. My Bible reading was more about just doing it every day than really trying to hear from God. I still believed all the right stuff and said all the right things, but the excitement I had when I first loved Jesus had faded to almost nothing. I'd been praying about feeling spiritually empty for months, asking God to make me excited about Him again, to talk to me in new ways, to light up my heart again. I never thought He would answer that prayer the way He did. That Monday morning, June 22nd, started like so many other mornings. I woke up at 5:30, made coffee, and went to my study room to pray like I always did. This had been what I did for over 20 years, an hour alone with God before everyone else woke up and the day got busy. I got down on my knees next to my desk, opened my Bible to Psalm 91, a part I'd been thinking about all week, and started to pray. I was about halfway through my usual list of things to pray for when something changed in the room. The air itself felt thicker, more charged, like right before lightning hits. I felt someone there who was both familiar and super powerful. Every hair on my arm stood up, and I knew for sure that I wasn't alone in that room anymore. Before I could understand what was happening, I felt a sharp pain in my chest that made me unable to breathe. The heart attack was sudden and really bad. I had no warning signs, nothing wrong before. One second I was praying, the next I was falling down beside my desk, and everything was going dark as my heart stopped. The last thing I remember thinking was a desperate prayer. Jesus, if I'm dying now, please take care of my family. Then everything went black. But then I was aware of things in a way I'd never experienced before. I found myself standing in a place that I can't really describe with normal words. I wasn't in my study anymore, I wasn't in my body, but I was more awake and aware than I'd ever been in my whole life. The presence I'd felt in my study was now something I could see, feel, and knew for sure was real. Jesus was standing in front of me, and He didn't look like the gentle teacher from Sunday school pictures. He was amazing, glowing with holiness, shining with power that made me fall to my knees without even thinking. His eyes had love deeper than I'd ever imagined, but also a sadness that broke my heart. "Thomas," He said, and when He said my name, it felt like it carried forever. "Lord," I whispered, finally understanding what that word really meant. Before I could say anything else, He said words that are burned into my memory forever. "September will mark the beginning of the end." The words hit me like someone punched me. I tried to understand what he meant, but before I could ask, he said them again even stronger. The beginning of the end. Suddenly, everything around us changed, and I found myself standing on a huge flat area under a sky that was getting dark and seemed to go on forever. It wasn't just that there was no light. The darkness was heavy, real, and evil. This was spiritual darkness that you could see. As I watched, nations started to rise up like dark, shadowy figures across the area. They weren't countries like on a map, but spiritual things representing world powers, ideas, and systems that were against God's kingdom. I could feel their hate for anything holy, their determination to destroy faith and set up their own rule. These shadowy figures were arguing, fighting, getting ready for a huge battle. I saw armies gathering, not just regular soldiers, but spiritual forces lining up for the final fight between good and evil. The tension in the air was so thick it almost felt like I couldn't breathe. Then I watched in horror as fire started falling from the sky. Not regular fire, but weapons of destruction shot by people. Missiles flew across the sky like falling stars. But these stars brought death instead of wonder. I saw cities disappearing in bright flashes, whole areas burned up by fires that wouldn't go out. The weapons were scarier than anything I could have imagined. Not just nuclear missiles, but technology I didn't recognize. Devices that seemed to mess with reality itself. It was like people had unlocked powers they were never supposed to have and were using them to destroy each other. But in the middle of all this chaos, I noticed something that gave me hope. Scattered among the destruction were people who seemed untouched by all the darkness around them. They were on their knees praying, and they were glowing with a light that the darkness couldn't put out. These praying people weren't in safe places or hiding from the destruction. They were right in the middle of the chaos, but they were protected by something invisible but more real than any armor. Their faces were peaceful even though terror was all around them. And their light got brighter as the darkness got worse. Jesus pointed to these glowing people. "These are the ones who will make it," he said, his voice full of both sadness and pride. "They know my voice and they are ready. They have prepared their hearts, not just their emergency supplies. They have stored up treasure in heaven, not just food in their closets." I could see what made these people different. They weren't just believers in name only. They were believers in real life. Their faith wasn't something they only did on Sunday. It was part of everything they did. They had built real friendships with Jesus, not just religious habits. Then Jesus turned toward the huge crowds of people running in panic, their faces twisted with fear and confusion. These weren't obviously evil people. Many of them looked like the church people I saw every Sunday. But they weren't ready for what was happening, overwhelmed by things they never thought would really happen. "But many who call themselves mine are not ready," Jesus said, and the sadness in his voice broke my heart. "They hold on to comfort, not to me. They have trusted in their money, their security systems, their retirement savings. They have made idols out of their nice things and forgotten the one who gave them those things." I watched as these unprepared people tried really hard to find safety in the same things that had given them fake security before. Their money, their connections, their governments. But all of these systems were falling apart under the weight of the chaos. "September will be a dividing line," Jesus continued. "Those who truly follow me will be shown, and those who have been playing church will be exposed. The time of easy Christianity is ending." I found my voice and asked the question that was burning in my heart. "Lord, what do you mean by the beginning of the end?" His answer made me feel cold all over. "It will not be the end all at once, Thomas. But in September, the shaking will start. You will see governments fall apart as the things they were built on crumble. Economies will fail as people realize their money cannot save them. Storms will get worse as creation itself groans under the weight of sin, and hearts will grow colder as fear replaces love in people's souls." As he spoke, I could see each prediction happening right in front of me. I watched governments falling like dominoes, not necessarily because of war, but because they collapse from the inside. The systems that people had trusted for safety and stability were proving to be houses built on sand. I saw economic markets crashing, not just from money manipulation, but because paper and digital money meant nothing when people were just trying to survive. People who had spent their lives collecting wealth found out that you can't eat money or use stock certificates as shelter. The storms he talked about weren't just weather events. They were judgments that seemed to have intelligence behind them. Hurricanes that formed overnight and hit with power never seen before. Earthquakes that hit in places that never had earthquakes before. Fires that spread faster than any natural thing could explain. But the most heartbreaking of all was watching hearts grow cold. I saw families turning against each other because of fear and desperation. I watched neighbors who had lived peacefully for years become enemies overnight when there wasn't enough food and supplies. The love that Jesus said would grow cold in the last days was disappearing right before my eyes. These are the first signs, Jesus said, not the final judgment, but the birth pains that tell you what is coming. I am calling my church to wake up from their spiritual sleep and prepare for what's ahead. But Lord, I asked, how can we prepare for something like this? His answer was both simple and deep. The same way Noah prepared for the flood, by believing my word and acting on it before the storm comes. The preparation I need is not mainly physical, though wisdom says to do some practical getting ready. The preparation I need is spiritual. He showed me what spiritual preparation looked like. I saw believers who were spending hours in prayer instead of hours watching TV. I watched families gathering to study the Bible together instead of everyone doing their own thing. I saw churches that were focused on making disciples instead of just adding members. Tell my people, Jesus said, his voice carrying the power of absolute truth, that September is not just another month on their calendars. It is a marker, a signal from heaven that the time of preparation is ending and the time of testing is beginning. Watch for the signs, he continued. When you see government leaders making decisions that don't make sense, when you see economic systems failing even though experts said they'd be fine, when you see natural disasters happening more and more often and getting worse, know that the shaking has started. But do not fear, he added, and his voice became soft like a father comforting a scared child. Those who walk with me have nothing to fear, because I will keep them safe even in the storm. I am their safe place and strength, always there to help in trouble. I felt myself being pulled back, away from that place of terrible revelation, back toward my physical body, lying on the study floor. But before the vision completely faded, Jesus gave me one last instruction. Tell them to examine their hearts now while there is still time. Tell them to stop playing church and start being the church. Tell them that I am coming soon. And when I arrive, I will separate the wheat from the chaff, the sheep from the goats, the prepared from the unprepared. I woke up gasping on the floor of my study, paramedics working really hard around me. Rebecca was kneeling beside me, tears running down her face, holding my hand like she'd never let go. "Thomas," she sobbed, "you've been gone for 9 minutes. Your heart stopped completely. The paramedics said they were about to give up when you suddenly came back." "I had to come back," I said. My first words were about the message I'd been given. Jesus showed me what's coming in September. We need to get ready. The medical team was amazed by my recovery. Dr. Martinez, the heart doctor who checked me at the hospital, couldn't explain how I'd survived such a bad heart attack with no brain damage or lasting problems. "Mr. Richardson," he said, shaking his head as he looked at my test results, "medically speaking, you shouldn't be here. Your heart was stopped for 9 minutes. You should have severe brain damage, but all your brain functions are perfect. It's unprecedented." But I knew it wasn't medical. It was a miracle. God had brought me back for a specific reason, to deliver his warning about September. Over the next few days, as I got better physically, I began the much harder task of processing what I'd seen spiritually. The weight of the message was almost too much. How do you tell people that everything they've trusted in is about to be shaken? How do you warn a comfortable church that their comfort is about to end? I started with my own family. That first Sunday after my heart attack, instead of going to church, I got Rebecca and our kids together in our living room and shared everything Jesus had shown me. "Dad," said our oldest daughter Sarah, who was home from college, "are you saying the world is going to end in September?" "Not end," I replied carefully, "but change dramatically. Jesus called it the beginning of the end, the start of the final shaking that will show who's really walking with God and who's just going through religious motions." Rebecca, who had been my faithful partner in ministry for over 20 years, understood how important this was right away. "Thomas," she said quietly, "if this is really from the Lord, we need to start preparing our hearts and our home." That week, our family began making changes. We started spending 2 hours every evening in prayer and Bible study instead of watching television. We began storing up not just food and water, but more importantly, storing up spiritual resources through fasting, prayer, and memorizing lots of scripture. We also started reaching out to other families in our church, sharing my story, and encouraging them to ask God about their own spiritual readiness. The response was mixed. Some people were deeply convicted and began making similar changes in their lives, while others said my experience was just the result of not getting enough oxygen during the heart attack. Pastor Williams was supportive but careful when I asked him about sharing my story with the whole church. "Thomas," he said during our meeting in his office, "I believe God spoke to you through this experience, but I'm worried about causing panic in the church." "Pastor," I replied, "Jesus didn't give me this message to keep it quiet. He specifically told me to warn his people about September. If they panic, maybe it's because they need to check whether they're really ready for what's coming." He eventually agreed to let me share my story during a Wednesday evening service. I was nervous as I stood before the church that had known me for 15 years, but I knew I had to deliver the message exactly as I'd received it. I told them everything: the heart attack, the vision of the darkening world, Jesus' warning about September, the division between prepared and unprepared believers. I shared the 3 signs he told me to watch for: government instability, economic collapse, and increasing natural disasters. The response was immediate and intense. About a third of the church responded with deep conviction, realizing that they needed to get serious about their relationship with Jesus. Another third stayed politely skeptical, treating my story as an interesting experience but not something that required personal response. The final third became hostile, accusing me of fear-mongering and false prophecy. "Thomas is obviously traumatized from his heart attack," said one longtime member after the service. "He's scaring people with doomsday predictions that have no biblical basis." But others recognized how urgent the message was. Within 2 weeks, our Wednesday night prayer meeting had grown from 12 people to over 60, as believers began gathering to seek God's face about the coming shaking. Word of my story spread beyond our church and throughout our denomination. Some pastors invited me to share the message with their churches. Others warned their members to avoid my dangerous teaching. I began traveling and speaking wherever doors opened, always careful to share the message exactly as Jesus had given it to me. The response was always divided. Some people were deeply convicted and made big changes in their spiritual lives, while others dismissed the warning as religious fanaticism. But as we moved into July and August, just weeks after my experience, the signs Jesus had warned me about began to happen exactly as he'd predicted. The first sign was government instability. In early August, 3 major world leaders made decisions that made no political sense and that no experts could explain. Trade agreements that had taken years to work out were suddenly canceled overnight. Military alliances that had existed for decades were broken up without explanation. It was like the people in power were being influenced by forces they didn't understand. The second sign was economic problems. On August 10th, stock markets around the world had their worst single-day losses ever. Not because of any specific economic event, but because investors suddenly lost confidence in the entire global financial system. Banks that had been considered too big to fail started showing signs of trouble. The third sign was storms getting worse. The terrible floods that hit Texas in July broke every weather record that existed. What should have been normal rainfall turned into catastrophic flooding that put entire cities underwater in less than 12 hours, something that had never been seen before. The destruction was unlike anything in recorded history, with water levels rising faster than any natural thing could explain. But most importantly, I began to see the spiritual division Jesus had warned me about. Churches that had seemed united for years suddenly split, as some members embraced the call to deeper spiritual preparation, while others resisted any changes to their comfortable routines. Families that had gone to church together for decades found themselves on opposite sides of the question: are we really ready for Jesus' return? Or have we been playing church while our hearts stayed far from him? The division wasn't between different types of churches or different beliefs. It cut right through the middle of individual churches and even individual families. It was exactly what Jesus had shown me: a separation between those who truly knew his voice and those who had only known about him. 1 month after my testimony at our church, I got a letter that confirmed everything Jesus had shown me. It was from a woman named Patricia who went to a neighboring church. "Brother Thomas," she wrote, "after hearing about your story, I realized I'd been a Christian in name only for over 20 years. I went to church, sang the songs and said the prayers, but I'd never really given my heart to Jesus. Your warning about September made me look at my spiritual condition, and I discovered I wasn't ready at all. I gave my life truly to Christ for the first time, and now I feel the peace you talked about, even as I watch the world shaking around us." That letter reminded me why Jesus had sent me back with this message. It wasn't to cause fear or panic, but to wake up his people before it was too late. Now, as we get close to September and I watch the events continuing to happen exactly as Jesus warned, I feel both sad and thankful. Sad for those who refuse to listen to the warning and are already being overwhelmed by things they never prepared for. Thankful for those who took the message seriously and spent these weeks getting closer to Jesus. The shaking Jesus showed me is no longer something in the future. It's happening right now, building toward the big events he said would begin in September. Governments are falling apart as their foundations crumble. Economies are failing as people realize their security was built on nothing real. Storms are getting worse beyond anything ever recorded, and hearts are growing colder as fear replaces love in people's souls. But for those who listened to the warning, who spent these weeks preparing their hearts instead of just their emergency supplies, there is supernatural peace in the middle of the storm. Just as Jesus promised, he is keeping safe those who truly walk with him even as everything around them shakes. The comfortable Christianity that was normal in the American church for decades is ending. The time when people could play religious games while living for themselves is over. From now on, only real faith will survive what's coming. I think about that vision often: the praying people who glowed with light in the middle of chaos, protected by God's presence while destruction raged around them. That's what true spiritual readiness looks like. Not hiding from the storm, but standing in the storm with faith that can't be shaken in a God who can't be shaken. My name is Thomas Michael Richardson. I was dead for 9 minutes on June 22nd, 2025, and got a warning from Jesus that September would mark the beginning of the end. Everything he showed me is now happening exactly as he predicted. The shaking has begun. The division between prepared and unprepared believers is becoming visible. The time of comfortable Christianity is ending and the time of real faith is beginning. The question isn't whether these things will happen. They're happening right now. The question is whether you're ready. Not ready with food and water, though practical preparation has its place. Ready in your heart. Ready in your relationship with Jesus. Ready to stand firm when everything that can be shaken is being shaken, because the storm is here. But so is the God who controls the storm, and those who truly know him have nothing to fear. If this message has reached your heart at just the right time, I need to know how far God is spreading this warning. Please write September in the comments below so I can see where this message is going. Subscribe to this channel so you won't miss future updates about what God is showing his people. And please share this with at least 3 people: your family, friends, or church members who need to hear this urgent warning. September is coming and the shaking continues to build. But it's not too late to get your heart right with God. Don't wait another day to make sure you're truly ready for what's coming next.